Hello, dear listeners. Welcome back to Shadow Storyteller. If you enjoy spine-chilling tales that linger long after the lights go out, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Your support helps bring more bedtime stories, crafted not to soothe, but to unsettle. Now, settle in, breathe slowly, and listen closely. It was the autumn of 2023. Crisp leaves skittered across sidewalks in the quiet town of Blackwater Falls, Vermont, a place so small it barely warranted a dot on most maps. The population? Fewer than 900 souls. Most lived in clapboard houses with sagging porches, their gardens long surrendered to frost by late October. Among them was Lynette Croft. Not a name you'd find in storybooks or on coffee mugs. Just a soft-spoken archivist who'd moved north a year prior, seeking solace after a divorce that left her hollow. She'd bought a century-old farmhouse on the edge of Whisper Creek Road, timber beams groaning under the weight of memory, windows fogged each morning like the house itself was sighing. Her daughter, Eloan, just 18 months old, slept in a room painted the pale blue of dawn. A white crib, a mobile shaped like paper cranes that never quite spun. And above it all, a digital baby monitor. Sleek, modern, with infrared night vision and a crisp audio feed. Lynette checked it every night before bed. Not out of paranoia, but routine. The kind of habit born from exhaustion and love tangled together. October 31st, Halloween night. But in Blackwater Falls there were no trick-or-treaters. The nearest neighbor lived half a mile away. Instead, the evening passed in stillness. Only the crackle of a wood stove and the occasional hoot of an owl breaking the silence. Lynette tucked Eloan in just after 7, kissed her forehead, adjusted the fleece blanket with embroidered stars, then retreated to the kitchen, where she sipped chamomile tea and reread old letters she'd never sent. At 9:47 p.m., the baby monitor emitted a sound. Not a cry, not a coo, but a whisper, low, rhythmic, almost melodic, followed by a slow shuffling. Lynette froze. Her cup clinked against the saucer. She crept down the hall, bare feet silent on worn pine floors. The nursery door was slightly ajar, exactly as she'd left it. Peeking through the gap, she saw Eloan fast asleep, thumb in mouth, cheeks flushed from warmth. Relief washed over her. She returned to the kitchen, chiding herself for letting imagination run wild. But 10 minutes later, the monitor crackled again, this time clearer. A voice, dry as autumn bark, hummed a lullaby Lynette didn't recognize. It wasn't hers. It wasn't human in the way most voices are, too resonant, too layered, as if two people spoke in unison from a single throat. Her pulse thrummed in her temples. She grabbed the monitor and stared at the live feed. Eloan stirred, eyes fluttering open, not frightened but curious, as though listening to someone just beyond the camera's view. Then, in the far corner of the room, near the antique wardrobe Lynette had never opened, a shadow detached itself from the darkness. Not a trick of the light. Not a coat hanging askew. It stood, tall. Too tall for the ceiling. Its silhouette tapered unnaturally, shoulders hunched, limbs elongated like stretched taffy. No face. Only a smooth, featureless oval where one should be. It didn't move toward the crib. It simply watched. And as Lynette's breath hitched in her throat, the figure raised one impossibly long arm and pointed, slowly, at the baby monitor. As if it knew. As if it had always known she was watching. She dropped the device. It clattered to the floor, screen shattering with a sound like ice breaking. She ran. Not to grab a weapon. Not to call the police. But to her daughter. She burst into the nursery, heart hammering against her ribs. The room was empty. Not just of the figure. The air itself felt thinner, colder, as though something had been sucked out of it. Eloan sat up, giggling softly, patting the empty space beside her. "Mama, man, dark man." Lynette scooped her up, trembling, and carried her downstairs. She called the local sheriff, Deputy Callahan, a retired Marine who knew every pothole in town. He arrived within 15 minutes, boots stomping snow off his tread. Searched every closet, every crawl space, the attic, the basement, even the abandoned root cellar behind the house. Nothing. No signs of forced entry, he said, removing his hat. Your locks are intact. Windows sealed. Probably just a glitch in the monitor, or maybe the old wiring playing tricks. But Lynette saw the flicker in his eyes. He didn't believe his own words. Because Blackwater Falls had stories. Whispers passed between neighbors over fence posts. Tales of the drifters, being said to linger in homes where sorrow pools like stagnant water. Not demons. Not ghosts. Something older. Something that feeds on the quiet ache of loneliness. She spent the next week sleeping on the nursery floor, back against the crib, a baseball bat across her lap. The monitor remained unplugged. November 2nd. Cold rain tapped the windows like impatient fingers. Eloan napped after lunch. Lynette, bleary-eyed from lack of sleep, dozed off on the living room sofa. She woke to silence. Too much silence. No birds. No wind. Even the refrigerator had stopped humming. She checked the baby's room. Empty crib. Her blood turned to ice. She tore through the house, calling Eloan's name, voice raw, desperate. Then a giggle. From the basement. She hadn't gone down there since moving in. The door was always locked, rusted shut, the previous owner had said. Now, it stood open. A narrow stair descended into blackness. The air smelled of damp earth and something faintly sweet, like overripe apples left to rot. At the bottom, Eloan sat cross-legged on the concrete floor facing the far wall. In front of her, the shadow figure. Not looming. Not threatening. It knelt, one long finger tracing shapes in the dust. Eloan clapped her hands, delighted. Drop again, she said. Lynette wanted to scream. To snatch her child and run. But her legs wouldn't move. The figure turned its blank face toward her. And in that moment, she understood. It wasn't here to harm. It was waiting. For someone to see it. To acknowledge it. To remember that it too had once been real, once been loved, once been lost. The figure rose. It stepped back, into the stone wall, and vanished as though it had never been there at all. Eloan turned, eyes wide. Mama, sad man gone. Lynette carried her upstairs, shaking. She never spoke of it again. Not to the sheriff. Not to friends. Not even in the hushed prayers she whispered each night before bed. But she left the basement door open. Just a crack. And sometimes, when the house settles into that deep, hollow quiet only old places know, she hears it, a soft hum, a lullaby without words. And in the corner of Eloan's room, the shadow returns, not to frighten, but to watch over. Because in the silence between heartbeats, some things are better left unseen, but never forgotten. The days that followed settled into a strange kind of rhythm, fragile, tentative, like walking across frozen pond ice. Lynette kept the baby monitor unplugged, replacing it with an old analog model from the 1980s she found stashed in the basement beside jars of pickled beets and moth-eaten quilts. Its static hiss was oddly comforting, a reminder that silence could be filled with something human, however faint. She began researching Blackwater Falls in earnest, poring over microfiche at the county library, scanning digitized obituaries, tracing property records back to the early 1900s. The house on Whisper Creek Road had belonged to a family named Voss, Elias and Maren Voss, and their son, Theron. Theron had vanished in the winter of 1921, just shy of his second birthday. No ransom note. No footprints in the snow. Only a small woolen mitten found by the creek, stiff with frost. Locals whispered it was a taking. Not by wolves, Vermont hadn't seen a wolf pack in decades, but by something older than settlers, older than the railroad tracks that once hummed through the valley. The librarian, a woman named Dorothea Withers who wore cardigans year-round and smelled faintly of lavender and dust, leaned close one afternoon and said in a voice barely above breath, "Some houses don't just hold memories, they hold guests. And sometimes, those guests never leave." Lynette didn't sleep much that week. She kept Eloan close, bathing with her, cooking with her strapped to her back, even letting her nap in the crook of her arm during afternoon storms. Eloan, for her part, seemed unbothered. She'd point at empty corners and babble, "Hi, mister," or "You stay," as if conducting quiet conversations Lynette couldn't hear. Then came the first snow, soft, fat flakes that blanketed the hills by mid-December. Christmas decorations appeared on porches, wreaths made of balsam, lights strung with care but not extravagance. Lynette hung a single string of white bulbs on the front eaves, more for Eloan's delight than tradition. On the night of December 23rd, the power went out. Not just their house, half the county. A downed line near the old mill, the utility company said over a crackling radio broadcast. Lynette lit beeswax candles, their honeyed glow pooling on the kitchen table. Eloan, wrapped in a rabbit fur blanket, played quietly with wooden blocks near the stove. At 8:10, Lynette heard it again, the hum. Not from a monitor. Not from the basement. From the hallway. She set down her mug of spiced cider and stood slowly, heart thudding like a muffled drum. The front door was locked. Windows latched. Yet the air shifted. Cold seeped in from somewhere unseen, carrying the scent of pine needles and wet stone. Eloan looked up. "Mr. Cold?" she murmured, not afraid. "Wants cocoa." Lynette's breath caught. She filled a tiny ceramic cup, left over from a yard sale, with warm milk and a pinch of cinnamon. Not for Eloan. She placed it carefully on the floor at the threshold of the hallway. Then she stepped back. For a long moment, nothing. Then, a ripple in the air. Like heat rising off asphalt in summer, but reversed, cold blooming outward. The shadow appeared again, not fully formed, more like a smudge of deeper darkness against the dim. It hovered near the cup, bent slightly, and the milk steamed, not from heat, but from the absence of cold. A minute passed. Two. Then the shadow straightened and drifted toward the nursery. Lynette followed at a distance, bare feet silent on the rug. She watched as it paused beside Eloan's crib, now moved to the master bedroom. It didn't reach in, didn't touch. It simply stood, a silent sentinel in the flickering candlelight from the hall. After a while it turned toward Lynette, and though it had no eyes, she felt seen. No, understood. In that moment she didn't feel terror. She felt grief. Not her own, but someone else's. A sorrow so deep it had calcified into presence. She whispered, voice trembling, "Were you his father?" The shadow stilled. Then it nodded. What? Slowly. A tear slid down Lynette's cheek. She didn't wipe it away. The next morning the power returned. Snow glittered under a pale sun. Eloan woke babbling about dream mister and warm milk. Lynette made pancakes shaped like stars and let her daughter smear maple syrup on the table without scolding. That afternoon she drove into town and bought a small brass bell, antique with a worn leather strap. She hung it on the inside of the nursery door. For wind, she told Eloan, though there was no wind that day. But that night, as she read a book about woodland animals, the bell chimed, once soft and clear. She looked up. The shadow stood just beyond the doorframe, watching Eloan sleep. It raised a hand, not long and spindly now, but human-shaped, translucent, like smoke given form. It pointed gently toward the closet. Lynette waited until Eloan was deep in REM sleep, then opened the closet. Behind winter coats and a box of old photo albums, she found it, a loose floorboard. Prying it up with a butter knife, she uncovered a shallow cavity. Inside lay a tarnished silver pocket watch, a child's leather boot, and a faded photograph. The photo showed a man with kind eyes and a high collar, holding a toddler with wisps of blonde hair. On the back, in delicate script, asterisk Theron and Papa. Christmas, 1920, asterisk. Her hand shook. She placed the items on the dresser. The next morning she boiled water and brewed 2 cups of tea. One for herself, one left steaming on the windowsill. Weeks passed. Winter deepened. The shadow became less of a visitor and more of a quiet constant, flickering at the edge of vision, warming the crib during cold snaps, humming that same wordless lullaby when Eloan couldn't settle. Neighbors noticed changes too. Old Mrs. Gable from down the road said, "Your house used to feel hollow. Now it feels watched over." She didn't say it like a warning. She said it like a blessing. By spring, the snow melted into rushing streams. Eloan learned to say thank you and please, and sometimes when no one was looking she'd leave a small stone or a dandelion by the basement door. Lynette never called priests or paranormal investigators. She didn't salt the thresholds or hang iron charms. She simply coexisted. Because she'd come to understand, the shadow wasn't haunting the house. It was tending it. And in return, it asked only for remembrance. On the anniversary of Theron's disappearance, Lynette placed a single white candle on the creek bank, where the mitten had been found. Eloan placed a paper crane beside it, folded from a page of an old ledger. As dusk fell, the air grew still. The candle flame didn't flicker. It burned steady, blue at the base, gold at the tip. And from the trees, a soft hum began. Not mournful, not menacing, grateful. Lynette took Eloan's hand and walked back to the house, the crunch of gravel underfoot the only sound in the violet twilight. Inside, the bell on the nursery door chimed once, though no wind blew. She knew then, the shadow would never leave. And she no longer wanted it to. Because some presences aren't meant to be driven out. They're meant to be welcomed in. Like memory, like love. Like the quiet promise that no child, past or present, is ever truly alone. As the seasons turned, the presence in the house grew quieter, not weaker but more settled, like roots sinking deeper into soil. By the time lilacs bloomed along the fence line in late May, Lynette no longer startled when a book slid from a shelf or a chair rocked gently with no one in it. She'd simply murmur, "Thank you," if a blanket appeared over her shoulders during a late-night reading session, or whisper, "He's napping," when the nursery door creaked open on its own. Eloan, now nearing her second birthday, spoke of the night friend with casual affection. She'd leave drawings for him on the floor, crayon suns, wobbly houses, stick figures holding hands. One morning, Lynette found one such drawing carefully placed beneath the brass bell. 3 figures labeled in Eloan's scrawl as Mama, Me, and Dark Papa. The name lodged in Lynette's chest like a warm stone. She began keeping a journal, not of fears but of moments. Small, inexplicable kindnesses. How the thermostat would rise just before Eloan's nap time, even when Lynette forgot to adjust it. How the baby gate at the top of the stairs clicked shut seconds after Eloan crawled past it, though no draft could have caused it. Once, during a summer thunderstorm, when lightning split the sky and Eloan screamed in terror, the lights in the hallway flickered once, then glowed steadily, casting a soft amber halo until the storm passed. Lynette never saw the shadow fully form again after that first spring. It became subtler, a ripple in a curtain, a patch of cool air near the hearth, the faint scent of pipe tobacco on still evenings, though no one in the house smoked. Yet its care was undeniable. Then came the fever. It struck Eloan in mid-July. One moment she was chasing fireflies in the backyard, bare feet kicking up dust. The next she was limp in Lynette's arms, skin burning, eyes glassy. The pediatrician in the next town overdiagnosed a viral infection, common but severe. "Keep her hydrated," he said. "Watch for seizures. Call if her temperature hits 105. That night the house felt different. Not ominous, but attentive. Lynette sat propped against the headboard, Eloan curled against her chest, soaked in sweat despite the cool compress on her brow. The digital thermometer read 104.8. Lynette's hands trembled as she reached for the phone. Then a draft. Not from the window. From the closet. The door swung inward slowly, silently. From within, the temperature dropped sharply, so fast Lynette saw her breath mist in the lamplight. The feverish heat radiating from Eloan seemed to meet that cold and balance. Within minutes, Eloan's breathing slowed. Her flushed cheeks paled. She sighed, a deep, peaceful sound Lynette hadn't heard since the illness began. She checked the thermometer again. 102.3. By dawn, the fever had broken. The doctor called it a rapid recovery. Lynette called it something else. She never spoke of it aloud, but that night she placed the pocket watch, now polished and ticking softly, on the bedside table. And she whispered into the quiet, "Thank you, Papa." The word didn't feel strange. It felt right. Autumn returned, painting the hills in fire and gold. Lynette planted bulbs in the garden, crocus, snowdrop, daffodil, things that would bloom long after winter's grip. Eloan helped, tiny hands patting soil into place, chattering to the empty space beside her as if giving instructions. One afternoon in late October, Nearly a year to the day since the first appearance, Lynette received a letter. Not by email. Not by text. A real letter, hand-addressed in elegant, looping script she didn't recognize. The postmark was from Blackwater Falls, but the sender's name was absent. Inside, on thick cream paper, was a single paragraph. Asterisk, some souls do not cross because they are bound by regret. Others stay because they are needed. My son was taken by the river's hunger. I followed him into the dark, but could not bring him back. For decades, I wandered the edges of this house, unseen, unheard, until your light returned. You gave me purpose again. You gave him a sister. And you gave me a home. I will watch. I will guard. And when the time comes, I will let go. Until then, thank you for seeing me. Asterisk. There was no signature. Only a small inked symbol at the bottom, a paper crane. Lynette read it 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and tucked it into the back of her journal, between pages filled with drawings of 3 figures holding hands. That night, she lit 2 candles, one white, one deep blue, and placed them on the windowsill facing Whisper Creek. Eloan added a smooth river stone she'd found that morning, placing it between them with solemn care. From the hallway the brass bell chimed, once clear and sweet. The next morning, Lynette found the pocket watch open on the dresser. The glass face was clean, the hands still. But nestled in the velvet lining of the case was a single, perfect white feather, too large for any bird native to Vermont. She didn't question it. She simply placed it in a small cedar box beside the photograph of Theron and his father. Winter came again, heavier this time. Snow piled high against the windows, and the wind howled through the eaves like a lullaby half remembered. But the house stayed warm. Full. Eloan began speaking in full sentences, telling stories of her own, about a boy who lived in the walls and liked to count stars through the attic window. He says I'm brave, she told Lynette one night, snuggled under quilts stitched by hands long gone. He says I remind him of sunshine. Lynette kissed her forehead and whispered, he's right. Years passed. Eloan started school. Made friends. Learned to ride a bike down the long gravel drive, always slowing as she passed the creek, always glancing toward the water as if expecting someone to wave back. The shadow never frightened her. It never frightened anyone. Visitors to the house often remarked on its calmness, an unusual stillness as if time moved differently within its walls. Contractors who came to repair the roof spoke of feeling watched but not judged. A college friend who stayed for a weekend confessed over coffee, I've never slept so deeply anywhere. It's like the house holds you. Lynette smiled. She knew why. And though the shadow never took physical form again, not truly, it remained. In the way the furnace clicked on before the chill could settle. In the way Eloan's night light never burned out, no matter how many months passed. In the soft hum that sometimes drifted from the nursery long after Eloan had grown too old for it. By the time Eloan turned 10, she no longer spoke of the night friend to others. But Lynette would sometimes find tiny offerings on the basement step. A ribbon, a polished acorn, a handwritten note that read, I still remember you. She knew then that the bond had shifted. Not broken, but passed. One spring evening, as Lynette sat on the porch shelling peas, Eloan came running from the garden, breathless. Mama, she cried, eyes wide. The paper crane I left by the creek this morning, it's gone. But in its place, there's a real one. A bird. White. It's sitting on the old stump, just watching. Lynette followed her daughter down the path, heart full. There, on the mossy stump where Theron's mitten had once been found, perched a single egret, rare this far north, out of its usual migration path. It turned its head slowly, regarded them with calm, golden eyes, then lifted into the sky with a single, silent beat of wings. Eloan didn't cry. She simply smiled. He's saying goodbye, she said softly. Lynette wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Maybe, or maybe he's just flying higher now. That night, the brass bell didn't chime. The house felt lighter. Not empty, never empty, but freer. In the years that followed, the strange occurrences faded. The cold drafts vanished. The humming stopped. The pocket watch ticked steadily, no longer needing intervention. But Lynette never removed the bell. She never closed the basement door all the way. And every Halloween, without fail, she left a cup of warm milk and a paper crane on the nursery floor. Because some presences leave, and some become part of the house itself. Like the creak of the third stair. Like the way sunlight hits the hallway at exactly 4:17 in the afternoon. Like the quiet certainty that love, in all its forms, never truly disappears. It only changes shape. Years flowed like creek water over smooth stones, quiet and sure. The house on Whisper Creek Road aged with grace. Paint faded, shingles silvered, but the bones remained strong, held together by something more than nails and timber. Lynette never moved away. She planted an apple tree near the east window, the kind that bore tart, rosy fruit by early September. Eloan climbed it every summer, barefoot and fearless, calling down stories to her mother below. Some real, some spun from dreams. By the time Eloan turned 16, she'd grown tall and thoughtful, with her mother's quiet eyes and a laugh that startled birds from the hedgerows. She played piano in the parlor most evenings, old folk tunes and haunting melodies she claimed just came to her. Lynette would sit in the worn armchair by the hearth, knitting or reading, listening as the notes curled through the rooms like smoke. Sometimes after Eloan finished, the piano keys would depress, just once, on their own. A single middle C, soft and clear as if in applause. She never flinched. She'd simply smile and say, "Thanks, Papa," before closing the lid. Neighbors stopped whispering about the odd Croft place long ago. Instead, they spoke of its warmth, how lost dogs always found their way to its porch, how travelers caught in storms were offered tea and a dry couch without question. The house had a reputation now, not of strangeness but of sanctuary. Then in the winter of 2042, Lynette fell ill. Not suddenly, not violently, but with the slow certainty of autumn turning to frost. Her doctor called it an autoimmune condition, rare, relentless, untreatable. "You'll need help soon," he said gently. "Have you thought about care?" She had. And she knew without asking that Eloan would stay. But it was the house that surprised her. The first night Lynette struggled to climb the stairs, a chair appeared at the bottom. Her favorite, the one with the crooked leg she'd meant to fix for years. It sat perfectly balanced as if waiting. The next morning, her medicine, left on the kitchen counter, was found on her bedside table, beside a glass of water that hadn't been there when she'd gone to sleep. She didn't tell Eloan. She simply accepted it as one accepts the turning of seasons. As her strength waned, the house seemed to lean in closer. Drafts sealed themselves. Blankets appeared at the foot of the bed each evening. Once, during a fevered night, Lynette woke to the sensation of cool fingers brushing her forehead, gentle, familiar, and the scent of pipe tobacco, faint but unmistakable. She whispered, "You came back." No answer. Only the soft chime of the brass bell down the hall. Eloan, now working remotely from the sunroom, rearranged her life without complaint. She cooked meals rich with herbs from the garden, read aloud from Lynette's favorite novels, and played that same middle C on the piano every night before bed, a signal perhaps that all was well. One afternoon in late March, Lynette asked to be taken to the creek. The snow had melted, leaving the ground soft and fragrant. Eloan brought a folding chair and a thick quilt. They sat in silence for a long time, watching minnows dart beneath the surface. "He loved this place," Lynette said finally, her voice thin but steady. Eloan nodded. "I know. I think he still does." A breeze stirred the willows. For a moment the air shimmered, not with heat but with presence. Not oppressive, not sad, just there. Lynette closed her eyes. "When I go, don't sell the house." "I won't," Eloan promised. "And leave the bell. Always. And the basement door. A crack. Just a crack." Lynette smiled. "Good." That night she slept deeply for the first time in weeks. In the morning she found a single white crocus blooming in the garden. Weeks too early, pushing through frozen earth. Eloan placed it in a jelly jar on the kitchen windowsill. It lasted 10 days. Spring deepened. Lynette's days grew shorter, her breath shallower. But her mind remained clear, her eyes bright with love. She stopped fighting the fatigue. Instead, she leaned into it as if the house itself were cradling her descent. On the evening of April 17, 2042, she asked Eloan to play Shenandoah. Eloan sat at the piano. The notes rose like mist over water, slow, aching, beautiful. Halfway through, the fire in the hearth flared once, though no wood had been added. The room filled with warmth. When the last note faded, Lynette was gone. She looked peaceful, as if she'd simply drifted into a dream where the creek ran clear and the apple tree was always in bloom. Eloan didn't cry right away. She sat beside her mother's bed, holding her hand until it cooled. Then she walked to the nursery, now a study lined with books, and touched the brass bell. It chimed softly as if in answer. In the days that followed, the house held its breath. Neighbors brought casseroles and quiet condolences. The pastor from the small stone church in town offered words of comfort. But it was the house that truly grieved. Lights flickered at odd hours, doors closed on their own, and the piano played no music at all. For 3 weeks, Eloan moved through rooms like a ghost herself, packing, sorting, speaking little. She kept her promise. The house stayed. The bell remained. The basement door stayed open. Then, on a misty morning in early May, she found something on the attic floor. Beneath a loose floorboard near the dormer window, where sunlight pooled like liquid gold, lay a small cedar box. Inside were 3 things: the white feather, the pocket watch, and a new photograph. It showed Lynette, young again, standing beside Elias Voss. His face now visible, kind and weathered, eyes full of quiet gratitude. Between them stood Theron, no longer a toddler, but a boy of 10, smiling. And beside him, Eloan, as she was now, hand in his. On the back, in the same elegant script, *, together we watch over you. *. Eloan sat on the dusty floorboards and wept, not from sorrow but from belonging. She hung the photograph in the hallway, between her mother's graduation portrait and a pressed maple leaf from Eloan's first autumn in the house. That night she played the piano again. Not Shenandoah, but a new tune, one she'd never heard, yet somehow knew by heart. Slow, tender, full of stars and silence and the sound of a creek running home. As she played, the fire lit itself. The bell chimed twice. And from the corner of the room, where shadows gathered thickest, a warmth bloomed, soft as a held breath. Eloan didn't look. She didn't need to. She knew. She was not alone. And she never would be. Years later, when Eloan, now a woman with silver in her hair and stories in her hands, welcomed her own daughter into the house, she showed her the bell first. "This," she said, "is how they say good night." The child, named Wren for the small brown bird that nested in the eaves each spring, reached up and touched the cool brass. It chimed. And from the hallway, a whisper of warmth drifted by, carrying the scent of pipe tobacco, old books, and apples ripening in the sun. The house breathed. The creek flowed. And love, in all its unseen forms, remained. Time in the house on Whisper Creek Road no longer measured itself in calendars or clocks, but in the slow unfurling of ferns in early spring, the first cricket song of summer dusk, the particular slant of golden light that fell across the kitchen floor each October afternoon at precisely 4:32. The house had become a living archive, not of dates, but of devotion. Wren Croft turned 5 in the summer of 2049. She was a child of quiet intensity, with eyes the color of storm clouds and a habit of speaking to the wind as if it answered back. She called the presence in the house Grandfather Shadow, a name she'd invented after finding an old tin box beneath the piano bench filled with faded letters tied in blue ribbon. Inside, one envelope bore the words "To my son from Papa," though Theron had never received it. Wren read it aloud one rainy afternoon, her voice small but steady. "He says he's sorry he couldn't stay, but he's glad we're staying for him." Eloan, now teaching history at the community college in Rutland, had knelt beside her daughter and smoothed the fragile paper with careful fingers. "He's not sorry anymore," she'd said. "He's at peace. And so are we." The house agreed. Strange occurrences, once rare, now felt like gestures, small, intentional acts of care. On mornings when Wren had nightmares, her stuffed rabbit would be found tucked under her pillow, though she'd left it on the windowsill. When Eloan worked late grading papers, a cup of tea would appear beside her elbow, steaming, perfectly sweetened just as she liked it, though the kettle hadn't boiled. And every year, on the anniversary of Lynette's passing, the pocket watch would chime once at dawn, its soft tick-tock echoing through the hall like a heartbeat returning home. Wren never feared the shadow. She welcomed it. She left drawings on the basement step, a son with a smiling face, a family holding hands beneath a tree labeled "Our House Forever." Sometimes in the morning the drawings would be gone. Other times they'd be neatly folded and placed inside the cedar box on the mantel, as if carefully archived. One crisp November evening, as the first snow dusted the hills like powdered sugar, Wren asked a question that stopped Eloan mid-stir. "Mama," she said, peeling an apple at the kitchen table, "will they stay when I grow up and have kids?" Eloan set down the wooden spoon. She looked toward the hallway, where the brass bell hung silent in the lamplight. "Yes," she said softly. "They'll stay as long as the house stands. And maybe, even after." Wren nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Good," she said. "Because I think Grandfather Shadow likes lullabies." That night, Wren sang one, a melody she'd never been taught, yet hummed with uncanny precision. It was the same wordless tune Lynette had first heard through the baby monitor all those years ago. Eloan stood in the doorway, tears tracing quiet paths down her cheeks, as the fire burned low and the bell chimed once, gentle, certain, like a promise kept. Years passed. Wren grew tall and curious, with a love for botany and old maps. She studied the way moss grew on north-facing stones, how certain trees bloomed only after fire, how roots intertwined beneath the soil in silent conversation. She often said, "Everything's connected, Mama. Even the things we can't see." In the spring of 2063, Wren brought someone home. His name was Elias, not by coincidence but by quiet intention. He was a woodworker from the next valley over, with gentle hands and a laugh that reminded Eloan of her mother's. He didn't flinch when the piano played a single note as he stepped inside for the first time. He simply looked toward the parlor and said, "Hello, sir," as if greeting an old friend. Wren blushed. "You felt it too?" "I felt welcomed," he replied. They married beneath the apple tree in June. The ceremony was small, just family, a few neighbors, and the rustle of leaves above. As Wren and Elias exchanged vows, a white egret circled once overhead before vanishing into the clouds. No one spoke of it, but everyone knew. They moved into the east wing of the house, turning the old sunroom into a nursery. Wren painted the walls the pale blue of dawn, just as Lynette had done for Eloan. On the ceiling she stenciled tiny paper cranes in silver. The night before their child was born, Wren sat alone in the nursery, hands resting on her belly. The brass bell chimed. Then from the corner near the wardrobe, still never opened, a warmth gathered, familiar and deep. She whispered, "He'll be here soon." The shadow didn't speak. It didn't need to. It simply leaned closer, and waited. At 3:17 a.m. on March 3, 2064, Rowan Elias Croft was born in the master bedroom, with snow falling softly outside and the house holding its breath. Eloan cut the cord. Wren wept. Elias held his son like something sacred. And in the hallway the pocket watch ticked steadily through the night. Rowan was a quiet baby, observant and calm. He rarely cried. Instead, he'd stare at the ceiling, eyes wide, as if watching something move across the plaster. When he was 3 months old, he smiled for the first time, not at a toy or a face but at the empty space beside his crib. Wren kissed his forehead. "You see him too, don't you?" Rowan gurgled and reached toward the air. As he grew, the house wrapped itself around him like a second skin. He learned to walk holding the hand of someone only he could see. He'd pause at the basement door and whisper, "Story later?" before toddling off. At bedtime, the lullaby would begin, not from Wren's lips but from the walls themselves, soft and resonant, like wind through distant pines. Eloan, now in her late 70s, spent her days in the garden or reading on the porch. She no longer needed proof. She simply knew the house was not haunted, was loved. And love, once rooted, never truly dies. One autumn afternoon, as maple leaves drifted like embers to the ground, Eloan sat in the old armchair by the hearth, her mother's chair, and closed her eyes for the last time. Her breath slowed, then stilled as Rowan, now 5, placed a small acorn in her hand and whispered, "Grandma's going to the creek now." Wren found them like that, peaceful, connected, whole. That night the house hummed, not with sorrow but with reunion. The piano played a gentle chord. The bell chimed 3 times. And from the attic to the basement, every room glowed with a soft, golden warmth, as if the walls themselves were breathing a sigh of welcome. Years folded into decades. Rowan grew, married, and brought his own children to Whisper Creek Road. The attic filled with new memories, school projects, pressed flowers, baby shoes lined on a shelf. But the cedar box remained untouched, its contents sacred. The brass bell still hung. The basement door stayed open, just a crack. And every evening, as twilight settled over the hills, someone in the house would hum that same wordless lullaby. Sometimes Wren, sometimes Rowan, sometimes a child too young to know the tune, yet singing it all the same. Because the song wasn't theirs. It belonged to the house, to the creek, to the father who stayed, to the mothers who returned, to the children who never forgot. And so the story continues, not in grand events but in quiet moments. A warm blanket on a cold night, a cup of tea appearing at just the right time, a shadow that leans in when the world feels too heavy. Not all ghosts are lost. Some are simply waiting to be. The years did not erase the house. They deepened it, like river stones worn smooth by centuries of gentle current. By the late 21st century, the town of Blackwater Falls had grown, not in size but in soul. New families arrived, drawn by rumors of crisp air, quiet streets, and a strange sort of peace that seemed to hang over the valley like mist at dawn. None knew the full story of the Croft house on Whisper Creek Road, but all sensed its difference. Rowan's children, twins named Marin and Theron, were born in 2081, beneath a sky thick with August stars. They came into the world only hours apart, as if unwilling to be separated even by minutes. From the first night they shared more than blood, they shared silence. They'd lie in their cribs, eyes wide open, gazing at the same empty corner, smiling at something only they could see. Wren, now silver-haired and steady-handed, recognized it immediately. "They've met him already," she told Rowan one evening as they rocked on the porch, watching fireflies blink over the meadow. "Just like Aloan did. Just like I did." Rowan nodded, his gaze fixed on the attic window where a faint light sometimes glowed long after the house had gone dark. "Do you think he knows how many lives he's touched?" "I think," Wren said softly, "he doesn't count them. He simply stays." And stay he did. Marin was the dreamer. She collected fallen feathers, spoke to raindrops, and claimed the wind carried messages from the quiet man. Theron, quieter still, would sit for hours in the apple orchard, drawing shapes in the dirt with a stick, always returning with muddy hands and a serene smile. Once, Wren followed him out there and found, in the soft earth beneath the oldest tree, a perfect circle of smooth stones, arranged around a single white feather. She didn't disturb it. She simply whispered, "Thank you," and left it for the frost to claim. The house adapted to each new generation. Rooms were repainted, floors refinished, the kitchen updated with solar panels and a compost bin. But the heart remained unchanged. The brass bell still hung on the nursery door, now a room shared by the twins. The pocket watch ticked from the mantel, its glass face gleaming in the firelight. And the basement door always remained open a crack. In the spring of 2095, something remarkable happened. A historian from the Vermont Heritage Foundation came to document vernacular architecture in the region. She toured the house with careful steps and a respectful hush. As she stood in the nursery, notebook in hand, the bell chimed, though no breeze stirred the curtains. She froze. "Did you hear that?" Rowan, standing in the doorway, smiled faintly. "Yes. He likes visitors who listen." The historian, Dr. Lena Cho, didn't laugh. Instead, she looked around the room with new eyes. "This house, it doesn't feel old. It feels inhabited." "In every sense," Rowan replied. She asked no more questions. But months later, a small plaque arrived in the mail, unofficial, unmarked, meant only for them. It read, "Asterisk in this house, love outlived time. And time, in turn, honored love. Asterisk." They hung it beside the photograph of Lynette, Elias, Theron, and Eloan, the one that had appeared in the attic so long ago. Now it bore added faces in its margins, drawn in pencil by small hands: Ren, Rowan, Marin, Theron. And in the corner, always, a faint shadow holding a paper crane. As the twins grew, they developed a ritual. Every Halloween, the night it all began, they would walk to the creek at dusk. There, beneath the willow where Theron Voss had vanished, they'd leave an offering: a drawing, a poem, a smooth stone wrapped in blue ribbon. And every year by morning it would be gone. Not stolen. Not blown away. Just accepted. One October 31st, as snow threatened early from the north, Marin placed a small music box on the stump. It played a single fragile tune, the same lullaby that had drifted through baby monitors and nursery walls for over a century. Theron held his sister's hand. "Do you think he hears it?" Marin nodded. "I think he's been hearing it all along." That night, the power went out across the county. But in the Croft house, candles flared to life one by one, unlit, yet burning steady. The piano played a soft chord. The bell chimed. And from the basement, a warmth rose like breath returning to the world. In the master bedroom, Ren lay awake, listening to the house breathe around her. She was older now, her steps slower, her hands marked by time. But her heart was light. She knew what was coming. And she was not afraid. Because she had seen, through her mother's eyes, her grandmother's journals, her own long years, that death was not an ending in this house. It was a doorway. And someone always waited on the other side. When Ren passed peacefully in her sleep on the first day of March, 2099, the twins were at her bedside. They didn't cry. They simply held her hands and hummed the lullaby, the one without words, the one that needed no translation. The next morning, the music box was found on the windowsill in the nursery, still playing. Decades flowed. The 22nd century dawned not with fanfare, but with quiet continuity. The Croft line continued, not through obligation but choice. Marin became a botanist, studying how trees communicate through underground fungal networks. She often said, "We're all connected below the surface, just like in our house." Theron became a storyteller, traveling across the country, collecting oral histories from elders in remote valleys. But he always returned to Whisper Creek Road. "My best story," he'd say, "is the one that lives in my bones." He never married, but he raised his niece, Marin's daughter, Leora, after a sudden illness took Marin far too soon. Leora was 7 when she moved in, small and watchful, with eyes that saw too much. On her first night, she stood in the hallway and asked, "Is he the one who keeps the dark from being lonely?" Theron knelt beside her. "Yes, and he's glad you're here." Leora smiled. "I brought him a gift." She placed a tiny clay figure on the floor, a man with no face holding a child's hand. The next morning, it sat on the mantel beside the pocket watch. The house absorbed each grief, each joy, each whispered secret. It stood through storms, through droughts, through the slow march of time. Solar panels gleamed on its roof. Electric cars sat in the drive. But inside, the soul remained untouched by progress, rooted in love, memory, and the quiet certainty that some bonds transcend even death. And still, the bell chimed. Still, the piano played. Still, the shadow waited. Not as a specter. Not as a warning. But as a promise. A promise that no one is ever truly alone. That every child is watched over. That every mother's love echoes through generations. And that in a quiet house on a forgotten road in Vermont, a father who lost his son so long ago found a family again, and never let go. By the year 2147, the world had changed in ways few could have predicted. Cities floated on oceans, forests regrew where highways once roared, and silence had become a rare and cherished gift. Yet the house on Whisper Creek Road remained. Not untouched by time, its shingles silvered further, its beams groaned with dignified age, but fundamentally unchanged in spirit. The land around it had been preserved by a family trust established generations earlier, ensuring that no developer, no drone highway, no synthetic suburb would ever swallow the meadow or dam the creek. Leora Croft, now in her late 60s, was the last direct descendant to live in the house year-round. She declined offers from museums, historians, and even a quiet proposal from a global ancestral memory archive that wanted to digitize the home's emotional resonance. She simply said, "Some things can't be scanned. They must be lived." She lived it well. Each morning she rose with the sun, boiled water on the restored wood stove, and placed 2 mugs on the kitchen table. One for her, one for the quiet one who never drank but always sat with her in spirit. She spoke aloud as she worked, about the warblers nesting in the eaves, about the odd frost pattern on the east window, about dreams she'd had in the night. She never expected answers. But sometimes the steam from her tea would curl in a particular way, like a hand gently waving, and she'd smile. Her granddaughter, Nia, visited every summer. Born in New Tokyo to Leora's daughter and a marine bioacoustician, Nia was 11 years old, with dark curls, sharp eyes, and a neural implant that translated whale song into poetry. Yet for all her future-born sensibilities, she loved the old house most of all. "It's quiet here," she told Leora on her first visit. "Not empty quiet. Full quiet." Leora knew what she meant. Nia quickly developed her own rituals. She'd sit on the basement step each evening and play recordings of humpback songs through a small speaker. "Whales talk across oceans," she explained. "Maybe he can hear them too." One night, after playing a particularly haunting sequence, a mother calling to her calf, Nia turned off the speaker and waited. The house was utterly still. Then, from deep within the basement, a low hum began. Not electronic, not animal, but resonant, harmonic, almost musical, matching the whale's frequency. Nia's eyes widened. "He's answering." Leora placed a hand on her shoulder. "He always listens." As the years passed, Nia returned faithfully. She brought new things: solar-charged lanterns, biodegradable soap, seeds from climate-resilient heirloom plants, but never tried to modernize the house's soul. She cleaned the brass bell with lemon oil. She wound the pocket watch every full moon. And on Halloween she walked to the creek with her great-grandmother and left an offering. Sometimes a printed poem, sometimes a data crystal containing a recording of rain in Kyoto, once a tiny origami crane folded from recycled satellite film. Each offering vanished by dawn. In 2163, Nia made a discovery. While helping Leora sort through the attic, now a curated archive of Croft family life, preserved with archival sleeves and climate control, she found a hidden compartment behind the dormer wall. Inside lay not papers or photographs, but a small obsidian disc, smooth and cool to the touch, etched with concentric rings. "What is it?" Nia asked. Leora turned it over in her hands. "I don't know, but it feels familiar." That night, Nia placed the disc on the nursery windowsill. At midnight, it began to glow faintly, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. And from it rose a projection, not holographic but luminous like mist-given shape. It showed a man, Elias Voss, kneeling by the creek in 1921, placing a small mitten on a stone. Then decades later, Lynette standing in the same spot. Then Aloan, Ren, Rowan, Marin, Leora. And finally, Nia herself as a child, holding hands with a shimmering figure no one else could see. The image faded. The disc cooled. Nia whispered, "He's been recording us." "Not recording," Leora corrected gently. "Remembering." From that day on, the disc became part of their ritual. Nia would speak to it, share her hopes, her fears, her questions about the universe. And sometimes in response, the disc would pulse warmly, or project a fleeting scene. A paper crane folding itself in midair, a child's hand reaching for a shadows, a lullaby written in light. When Leora passed at the age of 92, surrounded by family, sunlight streaming through the east window, the pocket watch ticking steadily on her nightstand, the disc glowed for 3 full days. On the 4th morning, it lay cold and dark on the mantel. Nia took it home to New Tokyo but returned to Blackwater Falls every year. She never sold the house. Instead, she established the Whisper Creek Stewardship, inviting distant cousins, longtime neighbors, and even historians to live in the house in rotating residencies, on one condition: they must honor the quiet. They must leave the bell. They must keep the basement door open. And they must listen. One such steward was a young man named Callum Reed, a sound archivist specializing in lost ambient frequencies. He arrived in 2181 with sensitive microphones and open ears. For weeks he recorded nothing but wind, water, and the creak of old wood. Then, on a still night in November, his equipment captured something else. A voice, layered and soft, humming the lullaby. He played it for Nia over a secure link. She listened in silence. Then she said, "That's not a ghost. That's a guardian." Callum stayed for 10 years. He never married, but he wrote a book titled The House That Held Its Breath, which became a quiet classic among those who believed that places could love. In it he wrote, "Some homes shelter bodies. This one shelters souls, not just of those who lived but of those who loved enough to stay." By the 23rd century, the world had learned to value stillness again. The Croft House was no longer an oddity, it was a pilgrimage site for those seeking connection beyond the digital, beyond the temporary. Not a tourist attraction. Never that. But a place whispered about in therapy circles and poetry slams in late-night university dorms. If you need to feel held, go to Whisper Creek. Nia, now in her late 80s, still visited each spring. She'd sit on the porch, her hands gnarled but her eyes bright, and talk to the air as if it were her oldest friend. "I brought you something new," she'd say, placing a small stone embedded with bioluminescent moss on the basement step. "It glows like stars underwater. I thought you'd like it." And every time by morning, it would be gone, replaced by the scent of pipe tobacco and the faint warmth of a hand that never touched, yet always comforted. In the end, when Nia's time came, she chose to return one last time. She lay in the master bedroom, the same room where Lynette had died, where Eloan had been born, where generations had begun and ended. Outside, the apple tree, now 3 centuries old, bloomed early as if in celebration. As her breath slowed, the brass bell chimed. The piano played a single note. The disc, brought from across the world, glowed one final time, casting the image of a paper crane circling the room before dissolving into light. And in the corner, where shadows gathered thickest, a figure stood, not tall, not distorted, but human-shaped, gentle, whole. He reached out a hand. Nia smiled. "Hello, grandfather." Then she closed her eyes and stepped into the quiet. The house exhaled. The creek flowed. And the story, though its tellers had passed, continued, because love, once planted in good soil, never stops growing. But peace, like memory, can be a veil. Years after Nia's passing, the stewardship continued, rotating caretakers, respectful visitors, the house preserved in near-sacred stillness. The bell still chimed. The basement door stayed ajar. The lullaby hummed softly in empty rooms. All seemed as it should be. Until the spring of 2215. A new steward arrived. Dr. Arlen Voss, a distant cousin twice removed, a historian specializing in anomalous domestic resonance. He was polite, meticulous, and deeply skeptical. Sentiment, he told the council, must not override scientific inquiry. He promised to honor the traditions, but only as cultural artifacts, not truths. The first night he installed discrete sensors, thermal, audio, electromagnetic. He placed a motion-activated camera in the nursery. He even set a small recorder beside the brass bell. Nothing unusual occurred for 3 days. Then, on the 4th night, every device shut off at exactly 3:17 a.m. Not malfunctioned. Not drained. Shut off simultaneously, cleanly, as if commanded. The next morning, Arlen found the camera's memory card on his pillow. On it, 12 seconds of footage. The nursery dark. The crib empty. Then slowly the shadow formed, not in the corner but inside the crib. It leaned over an invisible child, humming the lullaby. And as the camera's infrared light flickered, the figure turned its face toward the lens. This time it had eyes. Not human eyes. Black, depthless, filled with the glint of distant stars, and something else. Hunger. Recognition. Impatience. Arlen deleted the footage. He told himself it was a glitch, a trick of the lens, anything but real. But that night he dreamed of a creek, of a small hand pulling him under, of a voice, dry as autumn bark, whispering asterisk, "You are not family. You do not belong." Asterisk. He woke gasping. The house was cold. The fire had gone out. And on the floor beside his bed lay a single white feather, damp with creek water. He packed his things the next morning, but his car wouldn't start. His comm device showed no signal. The road out was blocked by a fallen tree, though no storm had passed. That evening he heard it, the lullaby. Not from the walls. Not from the nursery. From inside his own head. He ran to the basement, the one place he'd never entered despite the open door. At the bottom of the stairs, in the center of the concrete floor, sat the cedar box. Open. Inside, the pocket watch had stopped. The feather was gone. In its place lay a child's mitten, wet, brown with age, impossibly cold. And beside it, a fresh pair of adult-sized footprints in the dust, leading out of the basement, up the stairs, into the hall, straight to his bedroom door. Arlen screamed. No one heard. The next steward arrived a week later. The house was immaculate. Arlen's belongings were neatly packed by the porch. His journal lay open on the kitchen table. The last entry read, asterisk, "It doesn't protect the house. It protects the cycle. It needs a child. Always a child. And if one isn't given, it takes." Asterisk. The steward closed the journal, turned to leave. Then, the brass bell chimed. From the nursery, empty for decades, a giggle echoed down the hall. And the basement door, for the first time in 200 years, slowly closed by itself.